Louisiana Tech and a local gym held a self-defense seminar to help people handle dangerous situations. And one of those teachers was a victim of the Louisiana Tech stabbings last year. Jason Gregory reports.
Day of preparation for something no one wants to happen. Many women showed up to Louisiana Tech's self-defense seminar, and those in attendance said they feel better prepared to defend themselves if approached by an attacker. The woman who ran the seminar shares what she wanted those to know.
And they have a voice. Their words have power, and we taught them some good physical self-defense.
Moses McCain was one of the victims in the LA Tech stabbings last year.
I already knew that self-defense was very important, but after that I knew that it was the difference between life and death. So
one participant shared why she was motivated to attend the seminar.
As being a woman, it's scary, and having the tools to defend yourself, I feel like, is really essential for survival, no matter where you are.
Glass shared that she learned a lot from the seminar and strongly encourages those to participate in events like this.
You know, you never know when you might find yourself in a situation like that. You know, everybody thinks, oh, that will never happen to me. That's just a 1 in a million chance. But the reality is it can happen to you anywhere at any time. And so absolutely go for it.
In Ruston, Jason Gregory, KNOE 8 News.